Every empire wanted her DNA, so he guarded the alien queen's bones alone. The galaxy had forgotten her name, but the empires never stopped hunting her remains. Beneath the obsidian crust of Alara's Ix, sealed under an ancient vault woven from living metal and dust-fused stone, lay the bones of the last royal bloodline of the Arinyel species, the alien queen who once halted wars with a whisper and changed civilizations with a glance. When her city fell, not a single ambassador came to mourn. Only a single human did, Commander Eli Vance, a scarred veteran who had once shared a treaty table with the Queen and learned her truth when the rest of humanity saw only cold, alien elegance. Decades later, when her fleet was dust and her people scattered in genetic experiments or ash, he was the one who carried her broken body across 6 star systems, dodging bounty ships, decoding long-forgotten Arinyel burial rites, and descending into this forbidden moon with her cradled in his arms, like a sacred promise. And now he stood alone, gray-bearded and weathered, guarding her final rest in the dead silence of a moon whose orbit had been removed from all charts. No one came here by chance. You had to know. You had to want her bones for a reason. The first attempt came 6 years after he buried her, an Imperial drone shaped like a child's doll, scanning with red light for mineral disturbances. Eli dismantled it with his bare hands and scattered its data core into the sulfur winds. The second time, a mercenary team arrived with plasma rifles and gene samplers, promising double his weight in gold for just one shard of the Queen's remains. He left one survivor, blind and terrified, to crawl back and spread a warning. This moon was not a relic site. It was a grave, and it had a warden. That reputation turned to legend. Some called him the Bone Keeper. Others claimed he was an Arinyel hybrid, born of the Queen herself. But the truth was simpler. Eli had nothing left but duty and memory. In the vault, he'd built a shrine around her sarcophagus, lined with etched steel feathers mimicking her once living crown. He whispered to her when the storm screamed too loud, told her of empires rising and falling while her memory remained steady and unclaimed. But even legends have limits. One day, 3 dreadnoughts appeared in orbit, blocking out the stars. Not treasure hunters, not mercenaries. These were fleets from the Triune Accord, the 3 most powerful empires, unified for the first time in history not to make peace, but to claim the Queen's DNA. Eli stared at the sky and knew the time had come. He was one old man against a galaxy. And still, he would not let them touch her bones. The silence before the assault felt heavier than vacuum. Eli stood at the threshold of the burial vault, cloaked in layered armor forged from scavenged hull. Plates and Arinyel silk steel, the last remnant of the Queen's war banner wrapped tightly around. His arm like a sacred tether to the woman he had failed to save, but vowed never to betray. Above, the dreadnoughts lingered like dark gods with their eyes closed, but Eli had seen this pattern before. Observation first, analysis next, then full breach. They were waiting for orbital scans to finish, for the pulse beacons to paint the terrain and identify the fastest route to the vault hidden beneath jagged cliffs and shifting volcanic dust storms. It gave him hours, maybe. He sealed the outer vault gates and activated the old Queen's defense ward, a pulse-net calibrated only to her bloodline and one other, his. Because years ago, before he buried her, before he knelt in ash with her, weight in his arms, the dying Queen had pressed one long, silver-clawed finger to his chest and whispered a final rite that not even her own kind knew she could speak. It had marked him, made him custodian, her last human, her only one. Since then, the vault recognized him, and it hated all others. The Arinyel security architecture was not built for mercy. It folded space, fused time, reshaped physics in elegant, cruel ways. And Eli had spent 2 decades learning every inch. of it, training it, teaching it to respond to intrusions with escalating venom. The first trespassers would vanish. The second wave would suffer illusion so deep they forgot their own names. The third would meet Eli himself. He moved through the inner shrine, past the obsidian urns and glowing glyphs that hovered without source, each bearing a fragment of the Queen's titles. She who heard all frequencies, speaker of unseen agreements, mother to the hostless, titles no human historian recorded. He reached her sarcophagus, knelt beside it, and pressed his hand to the cold crystal surface. The Queen's bones, fragile now, humming faintly with dormant biotech, lay within, cocooned in translucent threads like cosmic silk. "They're coming," he murmured. "Not scavengers, real fleets. With doctrine. I don't think I'll hold this one off, my Queen." The sarcophagus pulsed once. Was it memory or something more? It didn't matter. Eli turned back and began preparing traps with ruthless precision. Along the jagged ravine that led to the hidden path, he triggered collapse chambers lined with gravitational mines, lured wild moon serpents to nest near the cliff edge with pheromone packets, and set up pulse reflectors to turn scans inward and confuse enemy eye. He'd done this before. Not at this scale, but it had always worked. Until now. The first landing pods dropped just before the moon's eclipse. They came in cloaked, but Eli felt them like tremors in the soul. Soldiers poured out in silence, faces shielded, gene scanners in hand, exosuits bearing insignia of the Triune Accord. All of them prepared to kill or die for bones. He watched from above, wind whipping against his face as the dust storm curled around the cliffs, and he waited until the first one stepped on the wrong stone. The shriek was instantaneous. Void lightning surged from the rocks, frying circuits and tearing through flesh. The soldier was gone before she could scream. Her squad scattered. The vault growled. The Arinyel systems tasted blood. Another group circled wide. Eli moved. He was slow now, old joints clicking with pain, but deliberate. A spear gun slung across his back, toxin rounds lining his belt, ancient Arinyel blades hidden along his spine. He approached the edge of the ridge, aimed, and fired. One round. A captain's visor cracked. The next was already falling before they realized someone was watching. Eli didn't wait to be seen. He melted into shadows, flickering between rocks, whispering the Queen's rites in the old tongue. The vault responded, mimicking his voice through the canyons, confusing the enemies with ghost echoes. A second squad lit flares and moved in tighter formation. Arrogant, trained, confident. He hated them most. When the Queen had died, they had called her a biological asset. When he buried her, they had called it theft. When he defended her, they labeled him a defector. But now, they came with medals on their chests and a charter declaring the right to dissect her DNA and clone her for peacekeeping purposes. What peace grew from desecration? What legacy could be born from pillaged bones? Eli snapped a flare stick and tossed it high. The Arinyel shrines responded with light so bright and cold it seared through every visor. Screams echoed. Chaos followed. And then came the breach. One dreadnought deployed an orbital rail spike solid metal designed not to destroy but to bore. It plunged through the mountainside, cracking open the upper chamber of the vault with seismic groans. The defense net shivered. Systems flickered. Eli stumbled as his lungs nearly collapsed from the shockwave. He coughed blood into his sleeve and forced himself upright. Dust rained from the stone ceiling. Something broke behind the sarcophagus. One of the feathers snapped off and fell, glowing faintly. He stared at it, trembling. And then he saw them, silhouettes moving through the fractured wall, led by a woman in gold-tinted armor. The Triune Gene Minister. He knew her face. She had once sat across from the Queen during treaty talks. Eli raised his weapon. "This is hallowed ground." She didn't stop. "This is a crime scene," she answered coldly. "We only need one shard, one femur. We'll leave the rest." Eli stepped forward. "You will leave nothing. Or I will leave none of you breathing." She sighed. "I respected her. You know that. But we can't allow that DNA to remain buried. Entire species could be healed. Cures, enhancements, futures." Eli's voice broke. "You want to carve her like a relic. She's not your future. She was someone. She trusted us. Trusted me." The minister gave a gesture. The soldiers raised their weapons. The Queen's bones began to hum. A resonance faint but growing filled the vault. The soldiers paused. One clutched his head. Another screamed. Eli whispered, "She remembers." The resonance grew. The sarcophagus glowed. Then everything exploded into silence. No sound, no motion. Just white light. When Eli blinked again, he was kneeling beside the sarcophagus, alone. The breach was gone. The soldiers gone. The wall sealed. Only ash remained where they had stood. The vault had chosen. It had heard her name in his voice. It had seen his fear, his grief, and it had acted. Slowly, painfully, Eli stood. His heart was thudding too loud. He leaned on his spear, limping, coughing, but alive. The shrine pulsed once more. And then, through the stillness, a soft voice not spoken but remembered echoed in his skull. "Not alone yet, Eli, not yet." He turned. No one was there. But for the first time in years, he smiled. Not because he was safe, but because he understood. The Queen had not just marked him. She had made him part of the vault. And if they came, again, if the empires returned with armies, AI, or stars themselves, he would still be here. Bones intact. Love unbroken. The guardian. The grave. And her silence would never be alone again. He had prepared for a siege, not a resurrection. But as the stars trembled and the triune dreadnoughts loomed heavier over LROX, something deeper than duty stirred beneath the layers of dust and mourning in Eli Vance's chest, something that no rifle or remote sensor could detect. The memory of her voice. The alien queen, whose name he never spoke aloud anymore, had once told him, not in words but through the graceful tension of her hands and the subtle pulse of their telepathic link during those final days of the Arinyel Accord, that her species was never truly dead unless no one remembered how they lived. Her bones were not relics. They were a vessel of cultural memory, a genetic chorus of everything Arinyel had ever been. That's what the empires truly wanted: blueprints to recreate divinity, engineer submission, own the legacy of a species that had never bowed. Eli stood at the temple's threshold, his knees aching, his pulse low but unwavering as the winds howled like ghosts through the shattered spires he'd reforged around her tomb. He had armed the perimeter with repurposed fusion mines, cloaked sensor webs, and anti-orbital flak cannons built from salvage over the years, all cobbled together with human stubbornness and reverence. But when the dropships descended, they came not with brute force alone, but with a strategy that struck deeper. They deployed simulacra, projections of the Queen's likeness rendered with synthetic grace and AI-perfect memory. One approached the temple, her hologram cloaked in ceremonial garments mimicking the very burial robes Eli had woven from the starless shroud of her fallen flagship. He did not raise his weapon. He only watched. It spoke in her voice too perfect, too smooth, without the weariness she had worn in her final weeks, and that was how he knew it was a lie. "Eli," it said, "you've kept me waiting too long." He smiled bitterly. "You're 3 decades too late and half a galaxy off from truth." And then, quietly, he ignited the failsafe, collapsing the entire outer corridor of the vault in molten stone, sealing the false queen behind a wall of heat and silence. He limped back toward the sarcophagus chamber, heart thundering, hands shaking not from fear but from the creeping certainty that this time they might break through. Inside, her coffin remained untouched silvered bone and crystal, sealed with Arinyel code songs he could no longer hear but never forgot the rhythm of. He knelt and touched the sarcophagus, whispering as he had every day for 30 years, "I promised." The storm above thickened, blinding white and red lights cutting through the sulfur haze. Explosions rumbled as the outer defenses fell one by one, and Eli knew the end had come. But then something happened, something he had never dared hope. For, not even in his loneliest nights, the air changed. The core of the moon vibrated. A low hum filled the chamber, resonating through the bones in his chest, and the sarcophagus pulsed once, dimly as if acknowledging him. He froze. "No," he whispered, "that's not possible." But it was. When he had buried her, he'd followed the rites exactly, sealing her not with finality, but with potential. The Arinyel did not believe in death as absolute. They believed in latency. And as her DNA called out from the last true source of her species, her bones responded, not with resurrection, not with flesh, but with a protective flare of ancient technology coded into her very marrow. The sarcophagus emitted a shockwave, and around the moon, a defense grid blinked into existence, long-dormant satellites rising from the crust, revealing mechanisms buried deeper than Eli had ever imagined. Arcs of plasma lanced into the sky. One of the dreadnoughts tilted, caught mid-maneuver, and fell. The second fled. The third stayed, sending a final wave of troops, desperate to breach the vault. Eli stood again, rifle in hand, dragging himself to the outer gate where the final passageway opened into the crater. There, beneath the glow of a dying star, he made his final stand. He was shot twice, once in the shoulder and once through the thigh, but he didn't fall. He killed 11 of them before his weapon overheated, and then he activated the core beacon embedded in his arm, something the Queen had gifted him in her final breath, a shard of Arinyel biosymbiosis keyed only to him. With a whispered phrase, for her, he activated it. The sky turned violet. The remaining troops dropped their weapons and screamed. Their memories, stolen, manufactured, or borrowed, collapsed under the mental weight of the true Arinyel broadcast, a wave of sorrow, glory, and fire. They ran, every last one. And when Eli collapsed, blood pooling under his broken knee, he laughed because he had done it. The empires would remember this place not as a resource but as a sanctum. The bones were untouched. He closed his eyes, but death didn't come as he expected. Instead, a presence filled the chamber again, not her body, not a ghost, but a synthesis. The eye imprint of her consciousness had activated. She spoke to him not through voice but through memory and light. She thanked him. She mourned with him. She told him she had left him a choice. And when his body finally gave out, they did. Not bury him beside her, they fused him into the shrine, encoded him into the same preservation matrix, so that for as long as her bones endured, so would he. For the next 100 years, no one returned. The story spread of a human who defied the Triune Accord, of an alien queen whose bones were still guarded by someone the galaxy now called the Last Sentinel. And when finally a child from the reborn Arinyel diaspora came, descended from survivors hidden for generations, she knelt at the edge of the crater, not to take DNA, but to light a single candle of remembrance. Her people were rebuilding, but they would never forget. Not her, not him. Not the promise that guarded the grave of an alien queen and the human who made the stars respect it.